And we are live in Facebook with Kaylee Vaughn, Rooted Revival. Hi, Kaylee.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good.
Gosh,
it's a nice stormy day up here.
So great to see you. That's what you were telling me. So we'll probably have to tell everybody that your internet might be a little, and I'll let you know if it's being a little weird because that would of course make it cut out, but I think we'll be fine. We'll be quick. So we got a lot of fun things to talk about. So today for Planted Places, guys, we've got, as you guys know, every 2 weeks, I'm so honored because I get to have Kaylee come here, and she is our garden guru for our Planted members. And you are doing your weekly journals, which is so great. And last week you talked about harvesting and, you know, how do you know when to harvest? And that was so perfect because so many of our members were at that point. And I am at the point right now, well, it's opposite always, where I just planted. I finished harvesting. I just planted. So I got a bunch of new baby plants, and you do too.
Yes.
In your wall. It looks
I've got the wall now.
Yes. Yeah, I'm so excited to get to talk about that. But I was going to tell everybody, we got 3 things we cover, right? I've got some weird stuff on my leaves I want to ask you about on my basil and my Thai basil. And then we want to talk about microclimates because you talk about that this week, and then a little bit about tilling. So we'll see how far we get because we don't have that much time. Where do you want to start, Kaylee?
Well, let's start with that basil and take a look at it.
Okay, perfect. So I've got, well, actually, one moment. I have it over here on my wall. This is one on the wall, and it's been growing in for a while. It's been harvested a lot. So much so that, you know, as we talked about last time, I added a lot of that fish emulsion and the nitro booster to my water basin. So because it was turning kind of bleached, it made them green, which is great. But then what I noticed is that I've got this, here's one, just on a couple of them. It's like that to the side. So it's got this weird, sorry, there we go. Isn't that interesting? So I don't know if that's burned. What do you think that is?
That looks almost like a burn. So it's very possible, you know, basil's a very sensitive leaf. It doesn't like getting water on it. It doesn't like, you know, if it got moisture and then sunlight on it, it can be very sensitive. You know, when you feel those leaves, they're very thin and they tear easily. Yeah, they almost feel kind of like tissue paper, you know? So they're leaves that generally, they don't like a lot of things touching them, basically, like soil splash up on them, things like that can cause leaf spot, it can cause burning. So with those leaves, I would definitely just, you know, go ahead. They're still fine to use, just cut off that end part where it's been burned, but I would go ahead and pull those off just so that the plant can focus on the healthy leaves.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, because what's interesting is I look at the new growth is super happy, very, very kind of deep green. So it's like everything else is happy. So that's what I was wondering.
And especially if those leaves were further down towards the base, that's not uncommon that, you know, you'll get splash up, things like that. You know, those bottom leaves kind of absorb a lot of what's happening to the plant. So if the new growth still looks good and healthy, that's really what we're looking for. And, you know, honestly, the plant's going to be just fine as long as it's got that healthy new growth on it. If we're seeing things spreading to all the leaves, that's what's more problematic.
Got it. Then we kind of know that we've got an issue. Yeah. And I noticed this is all in the older leaves. So I'm only seeing it on like the leaf. So, okay, cool. Now here we go. Here's another one. This is my Thai basil. This has been growing for a while. So it's big, and I've been eating it because I just love it a lot. So isn't it? Oh, they're so delicious.
Love it.
I don't even cook with it. I just graze it. I just,
the Thai basil is so good.
So yummy. Okay, here we go. Here's one. See, you guys see, I got to kind of search for them. So there's not too many of them that have this, but back here. Okay, so here we go. If I can, there we go. Can you kind of see that?
Kind of, just with those lighter colored spots.
Yeah. So it's got like some, I don't know if I can show you like, right. Sorry, I'm trying to, there we go. Can you see that?
Okay, yes. So that looks more like a leaf spot, you know, so that's some sort of fungal issue going on. Again, super sensitive to moisture. So it could even be, you know, the start, if you see it turning like powdery, kind of having that like film on it, it's usually powdery mildew. It doesn't look like that in this situation, but similar things. This one's probably just a different kind where it's, you know, a leaf spot of some sort. And it's probably
Okay.
most likely from moisture. Again, like, things splashing up on it from the soil. It's a sensitive plant. So if you see leaves like that, it is best to go ahead and remove them because some of them can spread.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And you know what's interesting? I'm glad you just said it, because when I'm growing in the wall, it's easier to control the splash. When you're
Yes.
growing in the containers on the, on a table or something, it's more challenging, right? Do you notice that now that you've kind of switched over? Yeah. Yeah. So I
Definitely.
think that's great advice for me. Like when I'm watering, make sure I'm, underneath here, right?
Right.
You know,
And one
the
thing I'll
hose.
show you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So with my tomato, it was having the same sort of issues where it was splashing up. You can see I had some leaves. I didn't take them off yet, just so you can see, some leaves
Okay.
down lower that were kind of getting that splash
Yes.
up. So actually what I did was I
Yes.
took some mulch and just kind of
Okay.
put it in the bottom. And what that can do just right along the top of that soil is that actually just helps to keep it so that when you're watering it, you don't have as much of the soil splashing up because you have a layer between,
Great.
the soil and the plant. So that really can help if you're having a lot of those issues. And you can use,
Yes.
leaves, or, I just use some like little bark mulch mix, whatever, just to create a layer between those two.
Okay, I'm so glad you just said that, leaves. You mentioned leaves, because I was like, well, what if you don't have any mulch at your home or your condo where you're living? Could you get the old, as long as it's not disease, just some of the older leaves and just put them on the bottom?
Yeah, so
Okay.
if it's healthy, especially like if it's a leaf from a different plant, that's even better. So if you have a tree, in the park or something, and it hasn't obviously been sprayed or something like that, leaf mulch is really great. You take those old crispy leaves and you kind of shred them up and put them on there. Leaf mulch is probably like the easiest
Okay.
thing to go source and find if you don't have access to other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you get it from a different species, even that's going to
Okay.
make it even more resistant because they're not going to have the same sort of bacterial issues. So it's a great
Right.
way to find easy mulch.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So okay, I love that. And that's so important, you guys, for all members out there and just anybody growing. Yeah. If you don't worry, if you don't have these things at home, you can, as Kaylee just mentioned, go to a local park and find, yeah, exactly. I love that. Or if you're on a hike, right? You find some,
Exactly.
okay. Even probably safer if you're on a hike because, you don't know in a park what they're doing.
Right. Yes,
Right?
those might be sprayed, but
Those
if you
might be
know for
sprayed.
sure, or
Hopefully
even a friend's yard, if they've got a tree,
Right.
if they've got like a lot of people have like the maples or the willows, things like that, those all work great. Just be sure to kind of rip those leaves up so that the soil and the water can still flow through them to the soil layer.
Exactly. Good point. Good point. Okay. Good segue into tilling. So let's talk about that real quick, because so now when we talk, can you talk just a few minutes about tilling and why it's not so good, and how what we're going to be doing here at Planet Places to kind of ease people off of how you can do it in a microclimate or micro setting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in larger agriculture, tilling is a very common practice because it's an easier way of basically disrupting any growth cycle that's currently happening, whether it's, an old crop or if it's weeds. It's an easy way to kind of disrupt that cycle and then you plant what you want. Now, the problem with tilling is that it's also disrupting all of those beneficial layers that are below the ground. So what's really feeding our plants are those soil layers. There's constantly animals and little microorganisms down there decomposing things, making nutrients available. So when we go through, we're actually disrupting those processes. We're loosening the soil, making it, more easy to erode or even blow away. A lot of, we see a lot of dust storms, things like that in agricultural areas because the soil is getting degraded year over year as we're tilling. It also releases carbon up into the atmosphere, and then it's also going to, over time, actually compact the soil more because we've loosened it now and it's packing down each year versus having, earthworms and crops and roots and things like that. They're keeping it with air pockets and more movement, tilth in the soil. So that's where kind of the no-till movement has come along and has been working really hard with regenerative agriculture practices to further ways of still getting high yields from your crops and your agricultural projects without having to disturb the soil layers. So it involves a lot of, you're adding layers on top of the soil instead of digging them down in. So when you're adding amendments and compost, you're just putting it on top. It also involves a lot of covering the soil at all times. So we're using rotational cover crops and things like that versus leaving the soil exposed, which is causing, again, a lot of erosion, a lot of runoff, a lot of problems like that. So we can mimic that in some ways in not only in our home gardens, but, it's really becoming a thing where can we do this in smaller potted environments as well to help preserve the soil that we have. And instead of going through those resources so quickly, like, dumping out the soil and getting new each time, is there a way that we can reuse that? And kind of what you've been doing, you've been testing it out actually in your wall. So I'd love to hear how that's going for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so glad you're talking about this. This is so important. And I think one thing I want to make sure that we post actually in our Facebook group is there is that Kiss the Ground documentary that talks about so much of this. And there's a part in that documentary where they show the carbon being released into the atmosphere. Like when all the farms are starting to till, you see it, like they actually have radiation, believe it or not, satellites in atmosphere that are recording this and NASA, and you see the carbon go into the atmosphere, and then when everything starts growing, you see it go down. It's fascinating because if you're a very visual person, like most people, you're like, oh my God, that is impacting what's going on. So yes, we have been, I've been so motivated by that. And that's also one thing that brought us together. And one thing that we've been doing the test gardens that we want to start bringing to our members is exactly what you're talking about, which is how can we be replenishing and not digging up all those microbes, all those tunnels that have been formed, because it obviously too helps with water absorption and so many different things, right? And so we've been testing that. We've been testing putting the worm castings, on top of the soil and putting, as we just talked about, some of the compost material, which dry leaves, whichever, on top of the soil. And it's exciting because actually just in some of our recent tests in the last month, I did one where I did it our regular way, dig up the soil and put the fertilizer mix in. And then I did one where, okay, don't dig it up, just basically pull it out. And this is going to be for plants where it's not really root bound, right? So when you're sending out a leafy green or like a spinach or lettuce, right? But and then we would just put worm castings and we'd use the mycorrhizal fungi to kind of help for the transplanting, but we wouldn't do the fertilizer mix. And literally, like, there's not a difference. So it's kind of, so early indications are, oh my gosh, this is good. And the other one, because it has fertilizer mix, it kind of gets going at first, but then the other one kind of takes off. So, which is interesting. I don't know if you want to talk about, I think going a little too much detail, but, why is that happening, in terms of like what can happen if you over fertilize?
Yeah, so over-fertilization actually is a really common problem with home gardeners, because truly it's hard to know, because in larger scale agriculture, they're testing the soil so that they know which nutrients it's needing. In home scale gardening, we don't really tend to do that. We just are kind of like, oh, I think it needs something, it's not looking good, so you kind of throw something at it, and you don't actually know necessarily what it needs. So what I caution a lot of my clients with is to actually, fertilize less. Like, don't jump to fertilization as your first go-to, because there's a lot of other things going on and we don't necessarily know what nutrient it needs. So it can actually make it worse sometimes. A lot of times you'll fertilize and then it looks really good for like, a day or two, and then it actually starts to get kind of yellow and crispy looking. You're like, oh, it almost looks like burned. And that's probably because it had too much of something. And so over fertilization can be just as big of a problem. So it's always good to go with, I always recommend really gentle fertilizers, especially if your plant's already established, because there's only so much it can take up at that point. So using, very low when you're looking at those, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and, the NPK numbers on the package. Sorry, we're getting really into it now, but, making sure those are low numbers. You don't want one that's like a 10, 25, 10. That's way too high. The organic amendments that we give our members, super low, all obviously organic, they're I think it's like a 222 or like something similar. Exactly. So what
Very
that's
natural.
really
But
doing
yeah,
is it's feeding the soil. It's just allowing some more nutrients to go into the soil in order to feed the microorganisms. And so then that's going to be broken down and made available to the plant. So you're not going to see as fast of results, especially, as you would see with synthetic fertilizers, because we're looking more at the long-term results, feeding the soil, which is in turn going to feed the plant, but it's a longer process for sure.
Yeah, and what you find over time, which is super interesting, because we're replenishing that soil. Like, I think the soil behind me has been used, I don't know, 3-4 times now. So it's been there for about 8 months. 9, some of the larger, well, actually all of them, because all I ever do is I don't replace the soil. So, but what we find is we find worms in there over time, right? Worms find their way into that soil, which I think is amazing. And so
Isn't
now
it?
you're getting the natural worm castings that are just happening. We provide them, but it's fairly cool. Yeah. So if my son is doing some planting for me or whichever, he'll be like, Mom, I found some worms. Should I get rid of them? I'm like, do not get rid of those worms, right? So then it's a teaching opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Let's talk about microclimates really quick here, because I know we're kind of going long here, but I know that you and I are in very different climates. And even here today, I'm in a different climate than I normally am. So yeah, what are some things that you're finding that are helpful?
Yeah, it's crazy how much things can vary, even just, across town from you. I live in a coastal area as well, but we're more inland. So the weather that we see can be dramatically different from someone, even just 10 miles away if they're in a more coastal area. So, everybody kind of has those microclimates. It just depends on even where your house is positioned. If you're positioned on the south side of, a hill, or, you're in a shady corridor, everybody has a certain, environment that we are growing in. If you're in, a patio, you're going to have, maybe you're on the north side, so you don't get a lot of sun, or you're on the south side, so you just get intense sun. So we all need to start thinking about those environments, kind of really sitting down thinking like, okay, what is my environment? What environments are available around my home that I can use to my benefit? Because that's really what microclimates are these little pockets of weather, basically, that we can use to our advantage when we're growing. So for instance, it's much cooler here. Most of the time, we're having a bit of a heat wave this summer, but most of the time it stays about 75 is the high in July. So for peppers, tomatoes, hot crops like that, it's so hard to get them really up and going without that heat. So what's great about, growing with planted places is everything's already, either in pots or in the wall, which can be easily moved. So why not take advantage of those microclimates? So I have my, my little pepper and my sad little tomato here that the chickens kept picking on. I have them moved into a south facing wall where it's kind of in a corner. I actually put a picture of it up on my little journal entry this week. So it's in a corner where it's super sheltered from any wind. It gets a lot of sun, and it's also under a dryer vent. So it gets, again, more heat there. So
yeah.
And then my wall move around, and it's got mostly green. So I'm able to move it and keep it kind of, where it's getting some nice sun in the mornings, but then it's getting some shade if it's nice and hot in the afternoon. So using those microclimates, just kind of be aware of what's around you.
I love that. Yeah. And that's what's interesting right now, because I've got my containers over here and I got my wall over here, and I've got a double-sided wall. So you see the leafy green side right now that's growing in, and I've got it where it gets morning sun. I moved it for our live. It's actually over in the sun normally. And then the afternoon, the sun goes around. The afternoon sun's where I've got my tomatoes and the basil and all the kind of mostly the herbs on that side so that it can handle that heat more. And it wants the heat. So yeah, exactly. And then these guys, because you can see tomato. Yeah, and I got this pepper plant. A little pepper look at those peppers coming in.
Ooh, those look great.
Aren't those? Yeah, those are happy. And then now I just got to wait for them to get red.
Yes.
So probably in about a month, I'm thinking. Yeah, exactly. But I same thing. I put them up against a wall because that's absorbing heat as well, right? So yeah.
Yeah, so I actually in my journal post this week, if you want to go look, I have basically tips for creating warm microclimates, things to look for around your property, around your home, and then also for cool microclimates. And then I talked about which crops prefer which ones. And there's some video tips up there as well. But it makes such a difference with your plants when you're giving them what they want.
Love
They're
that.
just going to really take off.
You see a big difference. You're absolutely right. It's so true. And that's why, like you said, I love, we got the containers, we're moving around. If you're on the wall, you just roll it around. We have
Yes.
brakes on our wheels. So, yeah, do you notice that? Yeah. So if you're on uneven ground, it's like, okay. And they're pretty heavy duty wheels because
They
this can get
are.
heavy with the water basin, right? And things like,
Right.
yeah.
No,
So,
it's so easy
but that's,
to move.
yeah. It's so great. But I just got to say for all the planted members, you guys, absolutely, you want to go to the member website because we've got a get rooted section and that's all Kaylee's content. That's where what she's just referring to, where the journal entry is, where these videos are, they're all under get rooted. So, and you do this weekly for us, which is so wonderful. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I am learning so much. I feel like I knew already so much, but I'm like, wow, I just keep learning more and more. So it's great. It's so great.
That's how I feel every day.
Yeah. Isn't it true? It's so true. Yeah.
You never stop learning.
You don't, like, you always like, oh, that's an interesting thing. Like, exactly. So I appreciate it. I always look forward to our time. So very good. Have a one. Hopefully it's going to be not so windy over there this weekend for you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get some rain. So fingers crossed for that.
That's true. That's true. I was like, I wish we could get some rain.
Right.
Not the time of year. So anyways, but all right. So great seeing you as always, Kaylee. You take care.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.